Thank you so much for keeping it KTN Farmers TV. This is Get It Right. My name is Susan Mwangi, your host. On today's episode, we will be discussing about food safety and food security. And today, I'm joined in by Dr. Victor Yamo, who is the Farming Campaigns Manager at Wild Animals Protection in Africa. Welcome to the show, Dr. Victor.
Thank you, Susan.
Yes, tell us more about yourself.
Thank you, Susan. Dr. Victor Yamo is a veterinary surgeon by training, but over the years has then shifted from veterinary medicine into matters relating to food production systems, trade around food, and byproducts of food. Yeah.
So when we are talking about food security, what is it all about?
To avoid all the technical jargons that come with some of the work we do, food security at a very basic minimum is about somebody being able to get the basic food that they require. And when you're talking about the security of food security, it's about ensuring that the person or individuals or the population are able to get the basic meal. And remember that there's carbohydrates, there's proteins, there's vitamins, there's minerals. All those things must be provided and must be readily available. At certain levels, then you also discuss it in relation to affordability, because food might be available, but then the general population might not be able to afford it. So in context, you're just looking at availability of food and access of the general public in getting that food. Yeah.
And what are these factors that contribute to ensuring that we are food secure?
There's a lot of things we need to be looking at, and the simplest one, of course, is looking at if I'm looking at it from a production perspective, is whether we are at a place where we are able to produce what require. And for production, then there are things that we need to look at. I will just highlight a few of them. The most interesting, of course, is the availability of land. You need space to grow chickens or to grow maize. And I think that's part of the challenge in this country because of counties and urbanization. We are slowly beginning to lose arable land that that is required to produce food. The second thing is the capacity of the farmers or the producers to produce that food, which means they must have the technical know-how. There must be the requirements, the seeds, if I call it generally seeds, must be available. And seeds, if you're looking at it from an animal production perspective, is the genetics. Is the cow that produces enough dairy milk available and the producer able to have access to it? Is the chicken that produces more eggs available? We're also looking at the whole system in terms of the capacity of the system to mitigate around itself. You're looking at things like fertilizers. You're looking at things like animal health inputs. If you're looking at production systems, can we get vaccines? Can we get feed, which is one of the big things that we look at in this country? Is the feed that is going into that system a wholesome feed, which then leads us to matters relating to food safety, because if the inputs are not right, you end up with a product that is not necessarily wholesome. Being in Africa, one of the things we're also looking at is availability of water. You need water. Most of us are on rain-fed agriculture, but generally you need water to be able to produce. Even if it's animals, you need to be able to water your animals. Otherwise, they're not able to produce at the optimal level. And then beyond that, you're also looking at equipment. Is the equipment that we need to do this work available? Is it planters we are looking at? Is it housing that we require for the animals that we are keeping? Is it feeders, drinkers, all that manner of things? And then beyond that is the know-how, the technical know-how. And I think part of what this program tries to do is to ensure that the farmer is then aware and has the technical know-how. I think part of it in this country, again, we have had challenges with extension services in counties, which means the farmer is then not able to get information that they require to be able to produce optimally.
So there is something you mentioned, sorry to cut you short, about the agricultural land. It is decreasing day by day, and of course this is due to development, urbanization. You've mentioned about irrigation, and our water tables are really going low. So what is the future like?
That's a hard one to address off the top of my head, but what I think and my position is that we as Kenyans need to have a honest conversation with ourselves, especially since the advent of counties. Because what counties has done is each county is now beginning to start developing, and part of development is developing county headquarters, which is taking away arable land. It's also counties are also becoming focused around where there's a lot of urbanization. People are moving from quote-unquote villages into the urban centers, the county headquarters, to try and ensure that they're able to get something around livelihoods. Coupled with that is the fact that Africa has one of the fastest growing populations. We have a youthful population. Our population growth rate is extremely high. And that means that the little spaces that we had, if you look at some of the counties around Nairobi, you find that the little land that we had is being further subdivided. And that then doesn't augur very well with productivity. I think the other thing that might need to be looked at, which is a constitutional thing, we needed to have developed a land use policy, which unfortunately I am not clear or sure that has been done and what it says. But essentially what that would have done is then to ensure that we protect agricultural land. And you can see what is happening in some of the counties around us is that agricultural land is actually quickly being converted into housing. In fact, last year when my organization did a survey amongst chicken farmers, smallholder chicken farmers who incidentally produce 70 to 75% of the produce in this country, a good chunk of them were very clear that it makes more economic sense for them to build a house and collect rent than to produce chickens. And part of it is because of, one, inputs have become a bit higher, the buyback price at the farm gate level is not very good. And those are some of the challenges that we need to address urgently.
And how can they be mitigated?
I think one is, as I said, is the National Land Commission simply needs to give us a land use policy that is very clear on what we do with our agricultural land. I am a bit challenged when I realize that a lot of our agricultural, remember that first, this country, 2/3 of it is arid and semi-arid, which means it's not places where you want to grow or do agriculture. So one of the things that we need to quickly do is, what are we going to do with are we able to protect the agricultural land to ensure that we are able to then produce food for ourselves? That's one. Two, we also need to look at our type of agriculture. A lot of agriculture that we do is based on rainy seasons. It's a rain-fed agriculture production system. We maybe need to quickly decide whether we want to move into irrigation and do it properly so that we are consistently produce and products at whatever time we require them, instead of the rain-fed agriculture where we have a lot of products during the rainy seasons and literally nothing when the rainy season is not there. Then we also need to improve on how we manage our post-harvest losses. We collect milk, it goes bad before it gets to the processing plant. We harvest maize that goes back in the silos before it can be sold or given to the general population. All those losses are then impacting negatively on our food security capacity. Okay. Yeah.
So the agriculture sector is faced with many challenges, such as the pests and diseases, and of course all this is leading to reduction of the production that we are having. So how can we be able to overcome the issue of food insecurity?
I think one of it is then address the issues around pests, and you're right. There are various ways of managing pests, and if you go through what our research institutes have been able to do, they've identified the things that we can do. I think our challenge has been, how do you convert research results into applicable science that is able to then be pushed to the general producers at the production level, so that the producer is aware what to do with certain things when they come into space. In terms of disease challenges, if you look at it from an animal perspective, there are things like vaccinations that need to be done. Are counties able to provide for some of these things? And that then goes back to our structure around delivery of some of these services. Realize that agriculture is devolved, veterinary services is devolved. Are counties prioritizing some of these things so that they're in a position to be able to feed themselves and to feed the nation? And then the other thing is then to manage the whole value chain, from production, transportation, into getting the food onto the plates of the consumer. How do we ensure that the food is not getting lost through the value chain? And how do you also ensure that during the value chain processes, as it moves across, it's not getting contaminated?
Yeah, because looking at Kenya, we are still a food aid relief recipient. And yet we have the main issue that farmers are facing is the issue of water for irrigation. Yes. And yet we see during the rainy seasons, we see floods killing people. Yeah. And do we really have capacities for water harvesting?
I think we do, and if you look at this country, there are specific areas. Some good friends of mine, like in Yatta, there are good people who have done projects that have shown that you can actually harvest rain. What is lacking is at certain levels what I'd like to call political will, and then the capacity for the general population to then demand certain things out of the leadership that we then have. Because the disconnect is that these things are known, research has been done, is how then do you deliver them? And delivery then requires political will that then allows you to be able to integrate. One of the interesting things, and I think I can challenge you, Susan, is if you go to our budgets, how much money do we put into agriculture or agriculture sector? Yeah? We are part of the process that signed into an international treaty that said that 10% of our budget should go into agriculture. But that's not happening. Yeah? We are in a situation where we don't even have the right people in certain spaces. Counties are lacking agriculture officers, veterinary officers, people who then would work with farmers, because our interest has been on other things which are related to ensuring that counties then are not, and I think it's something that we need to discuss as a country. Are we really seriously an agricultural country, or do we want to be a manufacturing country and then simply agree that in matters relating to food and being fed, we will be fed by our neighbors? That is something a decision that we need to quickly make as a nation.
So there is something also you mentioned about the young people, some of the young people shying away, from farming, of course, because of the challenges and the low production. What do you think can be done to entice more young people to dive into farming for the future?
I think one of the things that we need to quickly do is to make farming very lucrative. Yeah? If you're going to feed 50 million Kenyans, if I use that figure, it means that the production system must get to a certain level where we are then able to ensure that anybody in that value chain is able to get fair pay for good work, for work or effort put into it. At this point in time, what it seems like for the average, and my experience teaching university students around agriculture, is that what seems to happen is it makes more sense to be the middleman. Yeah, because the middleman puts in nothing, but gets out a lot of it. We need to kill that middleman so that you have a process which comes from the farm straight to the market, or to a processor, or somebody who then can manage that process. There are counties that have tried. I know down the road, counties like Makueni have tried to then put processing plants for some of the produce, then encourage the young Turks to then engage in that process so that they're able to make certain things out of it. So that's one important thing. Two, then look at, I think one of the things that a nation we need to look at is how do we then leverage our production system onto the high value markets that is coming into this country. And for essentially what I mean by that is that we treat this country as if this country is just the normal consumer, you and I, for lack of a better word. But if you look at what is happening in this country, we have big brands coming into this country. We have the big supermarkets, the big fast food restaurants, which are actually international brands, and their requirements are slightly different from, quote unquote, the local requirements. How do we then ensure that our farmers are producing at a level where we can get into these big brands? Yeah? How do we ensure that when the farmers are producing, the product that they produce can actually get into that big, the high value market? Yeah? Because if we do that, then we are able to protect the production system and ensure that it then gives us a better return than normal. But if we keep at the level where we've been keeping in, what do the big brands do? The big brands quickly say, you cannot produce at our level or our requirements, which then opens us to importation of certain products. And if you walk through some of the big supermarkets, you find there's a lot of products that have been imported, which the average Kenyan could be able to produce with just a bit of help from government or from the technical side of the business. And that is for me, that is the most worrying thing, that at the rate we are going, we'll end up with supermarkets sitting here that are essentially bringing products from elsewhere and depressing our markets and not giving our producers the opportunity to make good money. Yeah.
Get some good returns
Yeah.
from the hard work.